Hello and welcome to Ramblings of a 42-year-old man. Chris Smith here with you today, and we are going to continue our Final Fantasy series. Jumping into Final Fantasy X, the first release of Final Fantasy on PlayStation 2. And we'll talk a little bit about it. We'll talk a little bit about the sequel that came after, the first direct sequel to a Final Fantasy game. We'll talk through story and gameplay and some of the characters, and we'll just dig into it. This is probably going to be at least a two-parter because Final Fantasy X is a very big game, bigger than 7, 8, and 9 actually. And other than 9, which we were able to do in one episode, we definitely split 7 and 8 across a couple. So we'll see how it goes, but we will get started here. We'll start, as we always do, with some of the development opportunities, then we'll get into gameplay, characters, story, the legacy, and we'll even talk a little bit about Final Fantasy X-2. I'm not going to give a whole separate episode for that. We'll just kind of loop that in here at the tail end of this one. So please stay tuned as we talk about Final Fantasy X. Alright, so as I mentioned in the intro, Final Fantasy X was a PlayStation 2. It was released in 2001. Now, the director of Final Fantasy X is Yoshinori Kitase, who is back again. He was the co-director of Final Fantasy VI. He directed Final Fantasy 7s and 8s. He took a break from Final Fantasy 9 to let his other co-director from Final Fantasy 6 take that one over. But he is back again for Final Fantasy X. Now, the music for this one, Nobuo Uematsu is back for the majority of the music, but he does have secondary composers with him as well. So he's got some help from Masashi Hamauzu. I'm always saying thank you and forgive me for these Japanese names, but he's also got Junya Nakano is also helping him out with the music. So this is where Nobuo Uematsu starts to get help, and then eventually he actually steps back from the Final Fantasy series. This is probably the last one that he did the majority of the music on, and there's some beautiful, absolutely beautiful music in this game. So it's still really, he's still firing on all cylinders as far as I'm concerned. Now, the setting for this one is kind of strongly influenced by the South Pacific, including, Japan and Philippines and some of the, even Hawaiian kind of geography. All of that kind of South Pacific area is very much a flavor of this game. So you can see that they definitely had that as an influence as they were making it. So that's development. We'll get into some of the gameplay features and some of the ways that is similar to everything we've had Final Fantasy up to this point, and the way that it branches out in some new directions as well. All right, so being on the PS2, some of the graphical upgrades that they were able to do with this. So you now have 3D backgrounds instead of with a PlayStation 1 era where you would have a 3D background and it would just kind of be there and all the characters would be interacting in front of it or on top of it. Now we have completely integrated 3D backgrounds, so you can walk into the sides, come around you. I mean, it's as we think of games today where you're walking around environments and stuff, this is kind of the beginning of that for Final Fantasy. The way that the PlayStation 2 is allowing the graphics and the just the way that things work much easier with a better processing is able to kind of happen here. So you've got screens still, so again you'll be walking through like a certain area, you'll pass a break in it where you'll get onto the next screen, and then you can walk through the next area. Now, what that means for Final Fantasy X, being that it's early in PlayStation 2 and they're still feeling out exactly what getting pulled off, there's no actual world map in this game. You are just kind of going path to path, screen to screen as you're going through it. As such, it's very, very linear. Probably the most linear game that we've had out of Final Fantasy at this point. It will get eclipsed by Final Fantasy 13 when we get there, but very linear. You can go back and forth. You don't always have to just keep on trucking forward. You can backtrack to other areas as well as you want, but it is definitely, you are not traversing a giant world map where you can walk whichever direction you want to anymore. You're going down your path into your towns, into your villages, into your temples, and it's all cohesive on in your screen. You're not having to go on a world map and then go into the town icon to get to town. You're just walking into doors, and all of a sudden you're in the temples or towns and stuff like that. You still have random battles, just like you did originally in the other games. But now the active time battle that we've had ever since Final Fantasy IV is done away with here. What we have is more of a it's turn-based, and you can see the turns as they're coming up on the screen. The turns are pretty much based on your speed of your characters. A faster character is going to likely have more opportunities to go than a slower character will. But you get a lineup of about the next 3 or 4 attacks, and you'll see your character, the boss character, and you'll see the order that they're coming up. And it's good for strategy. You kind of plan out your attacks as you're able to look at that. And so, if you know that the boss is about to go, hey, this turn right here, I better go ahead and get myself a heal in. And what's nice with this one, you can integrate your characters in and out of battles as you will too. So you can play with 3 characters at a time, but what's great is in battle, you can flop those characters back and forth. So if I'm fighting and I really, really need a black magic spell, but my fast, hitting characters up, I can swap him out for the black mage. The black mage can come in, do the magic, so it's very cool. You get to play with all of your characters throughout the game instead of just, you're kind of always playing with your favorite 3. This game definitely, there's times where it requires really for you to get, passing characters back and forth, because there's certain enemies that only certain characters can hit. And each character kind of fulfills a specific role. You have one who has the black magic, you have one who's the fast hitter, you got one who's the hard hitter, you got one who can hit flying enemies. And we'll get into that as we get into the character profiles. But no levels in this game. Experience points, pretty much what you're doing is you've got a giant grid. It's called a sphere grid. And each of your characters is sitting on this grid in specific spots. And as they earn these sphere points, their experience points, they get sphere levels, which will allow them to move each position on the sphere grid. Each character has kind of a planned path, and then eventually you'll get to points where there's little locked spheres, where if you can find little key spheres, they call them, around the throughout the game, you can unlock those, and then you can branch your characters off. Now, lower leveled ones like level 1, level 2, that might unlock like a couple extra little stat bonuses. A level 4 key sphere, you could completely jump off your character's path and onto another one. If all of a sudden you want to turn your fast, quick hitter into a hard tank kind of character, you can get a level 4 key sphere and throw him onto the tank character's path instead. And so there's some customization to be done as you get further along in the game. At the early parts of the game, you're really going to kind of stick with that main path for each of your characters. For one thing, there's certain enemies that only certain kind of characters can hit, and you want them to keep on that path so they keep with those skills. But yeah, there definitely is some customization that you can do later on. And that's how you'll learn your skills, that's how you'll learn your magic, all that kind of stuff will come through that sphere grid. All right, with that, let's dig into our character profiles. The main character of Final Fantasy X is a blitzball player named Titus. Now, blitzball, we'll get into exactly what that kind of means later. That's kind of a combination soccer, water polo, underwater water polo kind of game. Anyway, so he is the land that we're going to be playing the majority of this game is a world called Spira. And Titus does not come from Spira. He is, again, thrown into this world from a completely different place. So he's kind of our surrogate character. We're learning about this land the same time he is. And he is brought from his homeland of Xanarkand by the main creature antagonist that we'll be fighting throughout the game, called Sin. Now, Titus has a very high agility, which allows him to hit faster enemies. So you'll have like wolf-like characters or lizard-like characters that are the speed enemies. They are the ones that Titus, you're going to want him in your party to hit those characters. And like I said, he's kind of your main surrogate throughout the game, and his interactions with everybody is how you're learning about this world. All right, next character is the character of Yuna, and in reality, for the story of this game, Yuna really is the main character of the story. Titus is our audience surrogate, but all of the storyline of this game and the things that we're doing for it really revolve around Yuna herself. Now, she is a summoner from the land of Besaid, and she is going on a pilgrimage to learn enough summons that she can finally do the final summoning, which is how people are able to defeat Sin. We'll get through exactly how that all works as we go throughout the story of the game. She's a white mage, along with her summoning skills. And now summons are a little different. Instead of just like calling out a summon and all of a sudden this monster comes out, does some sort of attack, and then goes away, you summon what they call Aeons in this game, and they come out and they replace your party on the battlefield, and they have options for you'll put in their attacks, whether you want them to attack. Some of them have magic they can learn. You can choose for them to do magic. And then they have when they hit their kind of limit break time, they got their big summon spell that you're kind of used to seeing in past games. So it's a little different. You're actually, playable summons where they're playing like a character on the battlefield. So that's pretty fun. So that's character of Yuna. Let's keep going. All right, next we'll talk about Wakka. Now, Wakka is also a blitzball player. He's from the town of Besaid, where Yuna grew up. He's childhood friends with both Yuna and Lulu, who we'll talk about in a second. He has a very high accuracy. He throws a blitzball. That is his weapon. But he's highly accurate, and he's great at hitting flying enemies. So you got bird enemies and things like that, that he can hit with this ball. that a lot of other characters can't because their accuracy is not high enough to hit things up in the air. So you'll need him anytime you got some sort of a flying enemy creature out on the battlefield. And that brings us to Lulu, who is Waka and Yuna's childhood friend from Besaid. Now, she is your typical black mage character. She's going to have all your black magic. She's not a hard hitter by any means. And you are going to want her for certain enemies like Flans and Elementals, which are characters that really can only be hit by magic. And the way the magic works, if you've got a Flan or an Elemental that have a certain kind of element, you want to hit them with the opposite element. So you'll see like ice Flans or lightning elementals, or you better hit that ice Flan with fire, or you better hit that lightning elemental with water, and so forth, things like that. So anytime you've got one of those enemies on the battlefield, you're going to want to scoop in your black mage to do an attack. Now, she's very slow, which means that most of the time you're going to want to start off your battle with a faster character to have more turns, but you'll want to get her in there to kind of clean up these magic-based enemies that can only really be hit with magic. All right, so the last of our kind of Besaid crew, as you would call them, is Kimahri. Now, Kimahri is a Ronso, which is kind of a big, almost cat-like, giant cat-like creature. And he's kind of a mix of your standard Dragoon and Black Mage. So, your Dragoons are your spear-carrying. They like to jump and land on people with their spears. But then he's also a Blue Mage, and he learns enemy skills by doing a technique on them called Lancet. And so he'll kind of do this technique on certain enemies that have skills that he can learn. He can't learn skills from every single one, but there's a good chunk of them that can. Usually they're the more unique type enemies. So if you got like the wolves or the Flans or the birds, those aren't going to be your unique enemies. It's going to be more like creatures you see that don't look like really all the other stuff that you've seen so far. He'll learn their skills. And one of those skills he'll learn really early is jump, and that's kind of his Dragoon skill. So that's why he's kind of a combo between the two. He's also very customizable. He shows up in the very middle of the sphere grid. He's got a very small section to himself, and all of that section, there's like level 1 or level 2 locks around it that we'll start getting those pretty early. And so we can go around to the beginning of just about every other character's tree and unlock it with one of those level 1 or 2 key spheres, and he can go off a path. So you can turn Kimahri into a Black Mage if he follows Lulu's path, or you can turn him into the Agility Fighter if you go up Titus's path. Or you can turn him into a White Mage if you want to follow Yuna's path. You have very much a very customizable character in the character of Kimahri. All right, next we've got the character of Auron. Now, Auron is kind of your typical knight/monk character. He looks an awful lot like a monk. He's got a lot of skills that a monk would have, but he's carrying around a gigantic sword. He's your tank. He's your hardest hitter, and he is made for, there are creatures that kind of have a shield defense kind of to them. You'll see shell enemies or really large kind of dragon-shaped enemies. He's got a piercing skill on all of his weapons that makes him hit them much harder than someone like a Waka or a Titus would be able to. So that's kind of his specialty. We'll learn a lot more about his backstory. He's got a very interesting backstory, but he's one of the first characters that Titus is going to get to know. He actually has met him before the beginning of the game, unlike every other character in this game. So we'll see how that backstory goes. All right, and then lastly for our playable protagonists, we have Riku. So Riku is your pretty much your thief character, very fast. She'll get a lot of turns as you're playing along with her. She also has that steal ability that she has. Every now and then you'll get into a battle screen where you'll see your monsters you're fighting, and off to the side is like a chest on the battlefield. If she goes and attacks that chest or steals against that chest, she'll get some items right there in the middle of battle. So that's pretty fun. But again, very, very quick. Not the hardest hitter, but she'll get a lot of turns. And so that's kind of your standard thief character. That takes care of our protagonists. We'll start looking at some of the enemies and our big kind of antagonistic people we're going to have to fight against. So first and foremost, when it comes to antagonists, your main antagonist throughout the entire game is this gigantic creature called Sin. And he's like this huge sentient force of destruction. Everywhere it goes, it's just destroying things. And summoners around the world of Sphere go on these pilgrimages to earn all of these summons. They get to this final spot of Zanarkand, which we'll find out how that works in a little bit, where they can call the final Aeon, and they are able to defeat Sin that way. But unfortunately, somehow, every 10 years, Sin comes back again, and they have to all do it all over again. So it's kind of a spiral, which is one of the reasons why they call Spira the name that they do. And so we'll see throughout the game, we're trying to figure out a way to completely defeat Sin so it does not come back, and that's our hope by the end of this game. All right, next character, not so much antagonist, is just kind of a lot of backstory, especially when it comes to Titus and Orin and even Yuna, is the character of Jecht. Now, Jecht is actually Titus's father, who has been missing from Titus's world for about 10 years. He was already kind of estranged from Titus to begin with. He was not the best father, and Titus and him did not get along. But there's a lot of backstory when it comes to him, and he's going to be a very pivotal character as we go forward into this game. All right, now the character of Braska is another one he's not protagonist or antagonist. He is actually Yuna's father, and he was the summoner that defeated Sin 10 years ago. Unfortunately, he did not survive that encounter, and so Yuna was left orphaned at that point, which is when she came to Besaid, and she grew up in Besaid with Waka and Lulu and Kamari. Kamari was kind of her guardian at that time. A lot of backstory with Braska. He's going to tie in very directly with both Jecht and Orin with some of their past history. So we'll talk about through that when we get to more story points of the game. All right, and then in addition to Sin being our main antagonist throughout the game, there's also the character of Seymour, who we will butt heads with definitely more than one occasion. He is a Guado, which is another race of beings in this world that's, still humanoid, but definitely different features. Very long, pointed nails, crazy hair, kind of funky shaped body. But he is a maester of Yevon. Now, Yevon is the main religion in Spira, and a maester is kind of like a priest, if you think about it. And he's recently taken over that post due to the death of his father. And again, he is going to be running into us quite a few times, and he's got his own plans with Sin, and we will uncover that as we go through the story mode as well. That gets us through characters, and we will go ahead and start jumping into the story of the game, which is probably going to take us a little while. It'll probably be somewhere in there. We'll do our split for the two videos, but we'll go ahead and get started on that and talk through the story of Final Fantasy X. So we begin Final Fantasy X with almost like a what do you call it, like a memory kind of scene. Like, we see the group, all protagonists are kind of sitting around a campfire. Titus goes and walks off on his own, and then you just hear him kind of talking to himself, listen to my story, this might be my last chance. And at this point is when Titus is going to start telling us all the back up to this point of the game. And so most of what we're playing in this game for at least the first 3/4, maybe even like 5/6 of this game is backstory that Titus is telling us. And so we start with that beautiful piano theme called Xanarkin that is playing over that Nobuo Uematsu made. And that's kind of our quick intro to the game before we get into the actual game proper. All right, so getting into the actual gameplay part of it, we find Titus. He is living in kind of the semi-modern world of Xanarkin. It's a big, gigantic city. There's skyscrapers and bridges and all sorts of stuff. But I say semi-modern because there's no cars or anything. It's very, very much almost like just a giant city in the middle of this kind of almost medieval type setting. Now, he is a star blitzball player, which, as I mentioned, is kind of like, think of soccer and water polo all kind of put together, except they're all playing this gigantic water bubble inside the water. There's a whole confusing thing about how long people can hold their breath in this game. A lot of stuff happens underwater, minutes and minutes and minutes at a time. Not quite sure how they're all holding their breath that long, but it is definitely part of this game. Now, during the game, we see Sin for the first time. This gigantic creature comes and attacks the city, destroying it, just decimating the city. Orin shows up here. We get to meet Orin for the first time. Him and Titus have a little intro to the battle screens and stuff. It's definitely kind of a tutorial of the game. They fight through the destruction, trying to escape from Sin, and then eventually they end up falling off of this bridge, and Titus and Orin, for that matter, fall into Sin, and then Titus wakes up, and he's waking up in the land of Spira. He doesn't know where he's at. He's kind of fallen into these ruins. He's found by Riku, so we get to meet Riku again real quick, and right after pretty much they find him, they do a little side thing with Riku. Again, it's very much a tutorial to get to learn the game system. And then their ship is attacked by Sin again. And Titus again, he falls off the ship into Sin, and then he wakes up off of the Isle of Besaid. Now, every time that Titus keeps falling into Sin, he keeps getting these visions of his father for some reason. We'll find out why that is later, but right now it's very confusing to him. He's like, why do I keep seeing my old man every time I fall into Sin? But he wakes up at the Island of Besaid. He sees a whole team of blitzball players practicing on the island. So evidently in this land, similar to Xanarkin, blitzball is a big thing. And so he meets Waka, who's one of the blitzball players, and he kind of explains his, like, I'm from Xanarkin, I fell into Sin, and everybody's kind of looking at him like he's nuts. Because Zanarkand in the world of Spira is a ruin. It has been a ruin for 1,000 years. And so Titus is very confused, like, what the heck's going on here? Waka is going to take Titus into the village, where we'll meet not only Lulu and Kamari, but we'll run into Yuna for the first time, who has just come out of the temple, earning her first summon, which is the summon of Valaforce, kind of big flying bird creature that she now has as a summon option. Now, this is the beginning of her pilgrimage. She will be leaving Besaid and going through all the temples across Spira, learning all of these summon spells, all of these aeons. And she does so by praying to the Faith at each of these temples. And the Faith are, people from the past who have kind of gone into hibernation at these temples in order for summoners to be able to summon these aeons from them to battle sin. It's a whole deal. So anyway, we meet Yuna for the first time. Yuna's about to start her pilgrimage. Waka says, you know what, let's bring Titus with us. Maybe somebody along this path will recognize him. Obviously his memory is weird. He thinks he's from Zanarkand, but maybe somebody will recognize him and he'll be able to find a way home. And I think, Waka has lost a younger brother sometime in the past, and he sees a little bit of him in Titus, so he really wants to help him out. So we end up following along with Yuna. Waka, Lulu, and Kamari are her guardians on her pilgrimage. And again, Titus is just kind of along for the ride, hoping to find somebody that he knows. And we will jump to ship to go to our next area, the land of Kilika. All right, so we get to the land of Kilika, and as we're starting to arrive near the island on the ship, we see Sin is coming. And Sin comes and attacks the island of Kilika, just decimates it, just is tons of lost life, tons of the land just being tore up, and then it takes off. We end up fighting, actually, some parts of it as well off of the ship, but it's gone. We get to Kilika, it's in disarray, but we still go through the path. The temple, luckily, is still there, so we're going over to the temple so Yuna can do her thing. As we go, we run into where all of the dead people have been gathered, and Yuna is requested to perform something called ascending. So again, just like Titus, he has no idea what this is, just like we don't. And so he's learning as we do that in Spira, when people die, if they are not sent, which can only be done by a summoner, their souls get sent to a place called the far plane. Think of it as like a terminology for heaven, I guess. And if they don't get sent, the souls will remain in these dead bodies and they will turn into monsters. So it's really creepy. So luckily, Yuna's there and she's able to perform this sending, and you see all these little lights coming out of the bodies and dissipating up in the air, and that's a whole big thing. So we get to the temple. Yuna does her prayer there. We earn the Aeon of Ifrit, who we have seen many times in the games in the past. He is the fire summon always. While we're also there, we also meet other summoners that are also on their pilgrimage. So a character of Donna, who has one guardian with her. She's very haughty and high maintenance and it's very snobby. And then we meet Isaru, who has two younger brothers that are coming with him as well. He's a lot nicer and wishing luck on her pilgrimage. So multiple summoners are going on this pilgrimage to try to get to the final Aeon in hopes that one of them will be able to get there and defeat Sin. So it's not just Yuna. There's a whole bunch of summoners that are trying to do this as well. And so we're done in Kilika. We helped a little bit with some of the restoration efforts, but mostly we got to move on with our pilgrimage. So we get back on the ship and start heading to Luca. That'll be our next stop. All right, so Luca, unlike Kilika and Besaid, there's no temple at Luca. Luca is specifically a sports town, if you want to think of it that way. They got a giant blitzball stadium. The blitzball tournaments are always held here. This is where Waka has been trying to bring Titus to, because he figures if he's a blitzball player, he's going to have to know somebody at this place. And Yuna's on her way there because they have to go through Luca to follow the path up to the next temple, the remaining temples. While we're there, the Besaid blitzball team, including Waka, who has also pulled Titus onto the team, are going to play in a tournament that happens to be taking place at this time. Now, evidently, somehow this blitzball stadium never seems to get attacked by Sin for some reason. They don't really ever explain why. We'll kind of come to find out a little bit why later, but we'll know that this seems to be a safe place for now from being attacked by Sin. So Titus and Waka take part of the tournament. You're able to play blitzball for the first time, and you can win this game, even though the Aurochs, who is Besaid's team, is definitely the underdog in the tournament. With Titus on the team, he's got some pretty good skills that as long as you play a really good game, you can win. It's not easy, but you can. But whether you win or lose, you'll continue on with the rest of the game. So at some point, the race called the Albed, which is kind of, and I say race, they're all humanoid people. They all look like people, but they're more mechanical in nature, and they like to build machines, which in Spira, evidently it's building machines is kind of heretical from the religion of Yevon, because they say that building machines is what caused sin to come up in the first place. It's a whole deal. But they try to kidnap Yuna, and we're like, why are they, what's going on? But we go, we get her back, we stop them from being able to kidnap her. But also at that same time, monsters come and start attacking the stadium. Orin shows up, he starts killing some monsters. Seymour is there for the first time we really get to meet him, and he summons his own summon called Anima, and he wipes out all the monsters of the stadium. And so at that point, Orin comes up to our team. He tells Yuna that he would like to join her as her guardian. He was Braska's guardian in the past, and Braska, like I mentioned on the character profile, was Yuna's father. He went on his pilgrimage 10 years earlier. Oran was his guardian, and so was Jekt. And Jekt, being Titus's dad, also from Xanderkin, disappeared 10 years ago. Evidently, he woke up in Spira 2 10 years prior and joined with Braska and Orin to go battle Sin. And so being that Titus is kind of pulled into all of this, and now Orin's there, is finally somebody he knows, Orin and Titus have now officially become guardians of Yuna. So, we got Yuna, we got most of our party except for Riku, who we'll see in a little bit, and we are all protecting Yuna. She's on her pilgrimage now. A lot more backstory to uncover, but that's where we are at this point. And so that's kind of where we are at the beginning. At the end of Luca, we've got a lot of our characters together, and we're about to set off to our next temple. All right, so here at the end of Luca is actually a good spot for us to go ahead and park for today. We'll kind of break off and jump into the next portion of the game with tomorrow's video. So again, a lot of our characters, I think everybody but Riku has now been joined, and we're about to get into an area where we kind of start to ramp up some more parts of the game. A lot more confrontations with Sin. We'll get to see Seymour a lot more as we go forward. We'll meet Riku and get her onto the team, and then we'll continue forward for the rest of the game. So thank you for checking out this one. Hopefully you'll stick around for part 2 tomorrow. And until then, thank you for listening to me ramble, and we'll talk again soon.